Hello guys, in today's video we can talk about Ruy Lopez variation C68 exchange variation. So I would like to show you today 5 very instructive games which actually explain and talk about about key pattern squares. So what is actually key pattern squares? Key pattern squares is a squares which improving our abilities to create a good position and win a game. In many different opening and in many different middle games, which actually become after the opening, we have this kind of ideas. So in today videos, which will around 30 minutes, I would like to explain you this very old exchange variation, but not with the castle short side, what actually play very successful and many years in the past legendary American champion Robert James Fischer. I would like to show you today a very old line where actually white trade the queens you're mostly going on the long side with his king, and then he tried to create it patterns on the king side where actually he have pawn structure majority. So the first game is between Grandmaster Vysochin and Dozhlikova, play in Ukraine championship in 2011. When I selected material, I tried to pick up games which was not shown before in some videos or chess books. So this is the first game. White is Vysochin, and he go with e4, black e5, knight f3, knight c6, and of course after bishop e5 we have Ruy Lopez position. A6, and now of course white have many moves here, bishop a4 or take on c6. Bishop a4 is the main line, but we can focus today on d takes c6 line. This is exchange variation in a Ruy Lopez. Bobby Fischer play very often in this moment castle short side, but I would like to focus on this move, d4, and we can look all games with this continuation. Queen d4. Queen is very strong in the center, and basically white don't have any black don't have any better choice to trade. Knight d4, c5. Of course, in this position black can play other moves. We can see in other games other moves, but c5 is mostly what black doing here. Knight e2. Why knight e2? Very flexible square for knight. You can see why later. Bishop d6, bishop f4. For example, this is one of the reasons why white use this square for his knight on e2 to create it to trade the bishops on f4. Bishop e6, knight bc3. So like we seen on a board, the position is still very quiet. No queens on the board. And this is the first moment where actually white created, and he was actually mostly focused on the king side of the board. f6, rook d2. First important moment, rook d2. Why rook d2? Very important square. I can say key square in this case of position, in this kind of position. Of course, if you use engine, I don't want to use engine and evaluate this position, because engine can say this is equal. But this is not the point of this videos. The point of this videos is to prove how you can use the key pattern squares in the middle of the center or on the king side to create it winning position, to create it advantage, right? Maybe not always winning position, but mostly advantage. So rook d2, knight e7, rook hd1. This arrow shows actually what is the plan. Now white have a pressure on d6, so obviously black must take. Knight f4. Of course here this is only move. Rook d2, rook d2. Rook is on d8 is very strong now. Also the knight on f4 attacking the e6. So black play bishop f7 and now f3. What is interesting here for white, besides majority on the king side, 4 pawns against 3, white also have very good connected knight connecting the d5 square, and this knight controlling the d5 square, and of course the rook on d2 just control the d file. Black play rook d8. This rook don't have any better square, so its logical way for black is to trade h4. This is very good move. Actually white just gain a space on the king side. Rook d2, king d2, knight g6. The idea of move knight g6 is connected with the plan to trade one of the knights. White accepted that. Very logical. And after bishop g6 we have a classical endgame here, where actually knight is much better than bishop. Position is not so completely close, blockaded, where actually knight will be much more better. Position is half open, I can say, but the majority and a little more active king guaranteed a very, very long-term advantage for white. White played g4. So the idea of move g4 is to gain a space. For now, this is only plan for white. Black play king d7, king e3, improving the king, king d6, knight e2, bishop f7, a3, b5. Of course, black don't have majority on other side, on the queen side, and this is what actually is very important for white. King f4, a5, c3. If you can notice when you see in this position, we can notice both, of course. So what is the point of this? The point of this to put the pawns on the dark squares, because black have a light bishop. Bishop c4, knight g3. Another key pattern square, that was move f5. That was square f5. So white aiming to going to f5 and making a pressure on the pawn g7, and that square is under check because king is on d6. So black play king e6, knight f5, king f7, g5. White, of course, try to create a pass pawn, because one of the classical rules in an endgame is to play on a side where you are stronger. This is actually Capablanca advice. Bishop e2, knight e3. Now the knight coming to go into d5 square. So in this case, f5 square is not only important, d5 square is also very important. King e6, knight e5. So white using basically both squares, f5 and d5, and he actually combinate the pressure on these two squares, and these two key squares actually improving the white position. c6, knight e3, knight back. He wants to going to f5 again, a4, knight f5. Now what we seen here? We've seen many arrows. Many arrows show all these key squares are important for white. Not only g7 pawn. That's a square e3, d4, d6, e7. d4 is not possible to use because pawn is on c5. But if that pawn moving, that square will be also interesting for white. If we look in position carefully, we can see the position is actually only play for white. White is a side who actually forcing the stuff on a board. King f7, king e3, bishop d1, f4, takes, pawn takes, bishop g4, knight h4. The plan of move knight h4 is connected with idea f5, king f4, and e5, and that's happened very quickly. After f5, black play king e7, king f4, and now this pawns going very rapidly up. King d6, knight g2. White don't rush with the e5 idea. He played knight g2 because his idea is to use squares e3 and g4 to win this game. So when we play this kind of position, right, so all these key squares patterns, which mostly is covered with the arrows, is very important to memorize if you play this kind of position, of course. This strategy and this key pattern squares is typical for this kind of opening. In all my other videos, I will try to focus on theoretician position, and this theoretician position after opening, when we're going deeper through the middle game, we can actually create it and learn a lot about key pattern squares. All these key pattern squares actually improving our technique. And like Master Nimzo said, technique in chess is the biggest creation. Actually, if we don't know how to win a game, why we play chess, right? So the final result in chess is always should be winning, right? This is what actually all chess players want to do in a chess game. That's why we play chess, to win a game, right? So this series of videos will be covered by many openings and actually talk about key pattern squares. Bishop e8, knight e3, bishop h5, e5. Now we see why it was important to bring the knight on e3, because now king on d5 is not possible. King e7, now f6 takes, knight f5 coming after this check, so he played king f7, knight f5. Another key square, right? This knight improving the pawns, and these 2 pawns now winning, of course. Knight f5, knight e6, king g6, f7, king g6, king g7, e6. Now white simply threats e7, f8 equals queen, so bishop is totally out of playing. You play bishop h5 because if you go e7, bishop can take on f7, but of course white play king e5. And now black play bishop g6, and now knight e8. After this move, black resigned, because after king f8, white simply play king f6 with idea e7 checkmate. Very nice game, which I hope explain a lot about key pattern squares in this certain kind of exchange variation in Ruy Lopez. Okay, let's go to the next game. This is the game between Henrik Danielsen, the Grandmaster, and Amarapala Sherrington. The guy was probably an amateur player, but I took this game because was playing simultaneous exhibition in Copenhagen 2010. Some of these simultaneous games are very instructive, because when the master plays simul, he also try seriously to win all games like he play only one game. So I took this game because I think it's very instructive. Grandmaster Danielsen play exchange line, so we have this takes d4, takes queen d4. We have the same position, queen d4, bishop knight d4, knight f6. Now we have knight f6, f3. Sometimes white play also here knight c3 move, and after bishop b4 he play knight d2 or f3, actually f3, but I think f3 is better move, because he just don't want to go knight c3 before he secure the pawn on e4. c5, knight e2. This is old, very well known key pattern square for knight in this kind of position, because knight on e2 going because the other knight need to going to c3. We can see all this with the arrows, and the bishop going to f4, and white is ready for castle, long castle, of course. White can play in some games short side, but all these games which I find I actually mostly is a long side, because it's more active. h6. This move I can't explain Why black played this move? Amateur move, we can say, without any reason. Much better was bishop d7 with idea alongside, or bishop e6, or any other move is better than h6, but knight c3, b6, bishop f4. Now the pawn on c7 is in trouble, and black plays c6. So this is already, the position is much better for white, because black didn't continue with the best moves in the opening. Castle, bishop e7, g4. So just like I said before in a previous game, white also using the king side like interesting place for playing, because he have majority on that side. a5, h4. So what we have like key pattern squares here on the king side? Well, obviously we have 4 pawns against 3. So this majority in this variation guaranteed very comfortable endgame for white. And this is the reason why I showed this opening. So this is a perfect opening for white, who actually likes to play for key squares, to use key squares with very quiet position without queens on the board. Knight g3. This is not for some tactical player, of course, but for any good technical endgame player, this is perfect position. g5. White immediately using space on the king side. H takes g5, h takes g5, rook takes h1, rook takes h1. Now black have a problem with the back rank, and this is this is actually the key square what white using now. It's a back rank weakness, and now he going with a bit d6. So we have a classical pinning. Of course, black in a last moment going to long side, and partly I can say a little improving his position, but after bishop f8, rook f8, knight f8, we have another key pattern square, and that's a square h5. Why square h5 is so important? Well, because if black played g6 in this moment to stop knight h5, white will going with a f4, f5. So basically white going with the knight h5, and black now play g6 because he couldn't have anything better here, and now white control the square f6, knight e7, knight e7, king d7. What we have again, knight against bishop. So now we know in this line knight against bishop is a huge advantage, because we already see in the previous game white already winning that endgame, right? And now these key pattern squares, which actually is very important for white. Here we go. This time he using a4 square. Master Nimzowitsch like to said before in his commentary, knight is a rim on the dim, and don't play knight on the rook file, because knight not controlling most of the squares when he's on the rook file. But in this case we have only move b5, and now white knight going to c5, b3. This is little tactical move. Now knight e6 will be mistake, because c takes b2 queen, so white play simply b3, and black continue b4. Now white played knight b7, and black was actually mated in the middle of the board, because he couldn't stop checkmate. So this game actually also prove position from the previous game, because we have here the same endgame position where white using all these key squares which he used in the first game. Now we can go to the third game between Krum Georgiev, a Bulgarian grandmaster, and Nikolai Padevsky. The game was played in Spartakliad in 1989. White play white pieces have Grandmaster Krum Georgiev, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6. Now we have another kind of endgame position, I mean exchange variation. d4, e takes, queen d4, knight d4, bishop d7. By the way, this is the main move, and I didn't use the legendary game Lasker Capablanca or Lasker Janovsky on some very old games which show in many videos. I pick up all these games, new games, because in these games we can see all these strategy tip squares, key squares I can say, and patterns which use in all the legendary games which I mentioned. So knight c3, castle, bishop e3. Now black can play bishop b4, but then knight d2. So this game black decided to go with the fianchetto, but now he play f6, knight d2, knight h6, f3. So we have another classical position in this kind of opening, and this is first important key square, long bishop diagonal, bishop going to d4 with a tempo, and now simply he attacking the pawn on f6. Black play bishop g7, white play king b1, b6. Black slowly tried to play c5 and kick back the bishop from d4. White took a space, c5, bishop going to e3, and now we have another position where actually we already know which squares are, which key pattern squares we use in this kind of position. If we see in 4 or 5 games, we know what we have to do. That's the point of this lecture. h5, g5. Now we have weak square, f5, weak square, d5. So the key squares are actually f5 and d5. Bishop c1, he moving the bishop because eventually white can try some idea of pawn f5, for example. So he removing the bishop on c1 because he just don't want that bishop will be under rook e8 attack, right? So h6, knight g3. Here we go. This is important key pattern squares which white can trying to use in this situation. But what is typical for this game, another key pattern squares, that was d5 and f5, but this time the knights are making all these maneuvers because they waiting a good chance to took positions with the knights on these two key squares, c4, bishop d2. Besides control of the squares d5, f5 with the knights, white bishop tried to be focused and going to c3 because that bishop can be very annoying because he making a lot of pressure on the pawn f6. So black play move a5, a4, and now the knight controlling to square the pawn on a4, controlling to square b5, and he actually preparing bishop c3. Here we go. And now we have all these key pattern squares, pawn d5, square d5, square f5, bishop on c3, and square b4. So white covered all these key pattern squares, and now he make this unbelievable sacrifice, rook d6. So this is also tactical pattern. This is not only positional pattern key square. Rook d6. Why rook d6? Well, after rook d6, black definitely must take. And now what we have? We have very weak all these squares, including the pawns on d6 and pawn on h6 and bishop on g7, and knights are making a lot of pressure on the black position. Bishop f8, he tried to hold the bishop, and now rook d1. King c7, rook d4. White don't rush anywhere, the black position is completely in stuck, and extra material which actually black have doesn't mean so much because the black pieces are totally passive. King c6, g4. he didn't want to take on c4 here. Interesting, knight c4. What actually was possible, he just want to play g4. King c5, rook d2, rook b8. Of course, why black intend to make some space. Knight d4, bishop d7, knight b5. The idea of move knight b5 is actually to go rook d5 and knight c4. So black play bishop e6 and now white play knight d5. We have in this situation very important key squares b5 and d5, where actually from these squares actually white completely paralyze the black position. After knight d5, the pawn on f6 is also vulnerable, so black just play one waiting move, rook b7, and now king a2. Rook d7, rook d4. What is the idea of this move? The idea of this move is connected with a very interesting plan. Sacrifice rook on c4, and this happened actually. Now he takes, and after bishop d4, white simply black resigned because white simply cannot stop b3 checkmate, and black resigned. Another wonderful game where actually white use first key pattern squares on the king side, and then he use wonderful idea with the sacrifice rook on d6 quality, and use all these pattern squares on the queen side. Next game is McDonald Adams. This is not Michael Adams, this is Mark Adam, unknown player. McDonald Neil is a Scottish grandmaster. e4, e5. This game was played in 1995 on championship of Scotland, I think. Also variation exchange, d4 takes, queen d4. Now we have another same variation. I focus this half an hour of videos only talk about this line, and now white play knight d2. This is a little different than other games. In other games we usually see the knight is on c3, but this doesn't change so much the white strategy if we talk about key pattern squares on the king side. c5, knight e2, bishop c6, castle alongside. So the knight is on d2, he's not on c3. Not such a big difference. Knight f6, f3. f3 is always important move. Bishop e7, knight f4. Okay, white intend to control the strong square on f4. Black play b6, knight c4. Now we seen why in this game he used knight on d2, not on c3, because he want to use one square with the key pattern square with his knight on the c4, and other knight with on f4. Why this is so important? Well, that idea have really directly idea with a knight e5. So white knights are extremely active here. Rook d1, knight e7. Now black intend to control the square e5, but bishop d2 coming to c3. Actually, he make a space for the knight when the bishop was moving, right? He make a space for the knight. And now we see in classical key pattern square what actually we seen in all other games before. So g6, knight d5. Knights connected, and of course black still, white still not threats, nothing concrete, but he slowly improving his knight and he waiting his chance. Bishop d8, b3, h5, c4. Definitely white control the middle center of the board with his strong knights, with the key pattern squares knight d5 and knight e3. Of course, white structure is something what is actually very important in investment for the rest of the game, for the end game. Bishop b7, a4, a5, h3. He's slowly preparing g4, but he don't rush. Bishop h4, king c2, bishop g3, bishop c3. Now we seen another important key square for the knight, for the bishop, what actually we seen in all other games before. So key squares, key pattern squares in this particular variation is d5, f5, and bishop is on c3. So this is what we've seen in all games before. This is actually what we have to use in our games, of course, if we play this kind of position. Rook e6, bishop e1, bishop e5. Now we have bishop on e5, okay. Knight f1, knight c6. Black also tried to improve his position. Knight g3, knight c6, knight e2. In this situation, white need to cover the square d4, which actually now black took under control. At the moment, rook e6, bishop c3, bishop c3, knight c3. d4 square is covered. b4 square is not so important for white. And the white king going to e3. Now he used knight e4 square, but this move actually is not a good move, because knight takes, pawn takes, and white play knight to b5. What we have here again, knight against bishop, same story, but we have also rooks on the board. But problem with the black position is actually key pattern squares on the queen side, weak pawn on the d4, and actually majority on the king side. Everything we seen with the arrows and the circles. So rook d8, c5, extremely strong move, c5. White aiming to go with his rook on the c1. After that, the position is completely under white favor. Bishop c6, c takes b6, bishop takes b5, a takes b5, and now in this particular situation, black plays c5 and white just take en passant and black resign. But what's happen if white play this move? In that case, white will play just rook c1, king b7, and simply king d3. After king d3, white going to c4, very forced, and the pawn d4 is just losing. So the endgame is totally hopeless for black. In this situation, in a game was happened just like that, and of course white took en passant, and now if black play rook d6, white will play simply rook c1, so the position is over. And the game number 5 is game between Vladimir Krum Georgiev and Jacobs, Baron Jacobs. This tournament played in 1989 in Capel Place, some open tournament. And this game is also extremely instructive, because white still play this variation with the queen d4, knight d4, knight c3. Now in a previous game we've seen knight e2 or f3, but knight c3, castle, bishop e3, bishop b4. In some games, when I researching material, I find the game with the castle, where actually white allow bishop c3, but I think this move is better, absolutely better, because I think for white is very important to hold the healthy pawn structure, because the pawn structure is something what give us later very important key squares, key pattern squares for other our pieces, especially for knights. Rook e8, castle, f5, white hitting f5, black hitting f5, white play first bishop d4. Now we've seen again bishop d4. In some games we've seen bishop c3, but here white use key pattern square d4. Now knight f6, and now white play e5. Another key pattern square is a pass connected pawn. Knight d5, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, and now what we've seen, another key pattern square, knight f4. Why this square is so important? Not only because attacking the pawn on d5. After move h4, that knight established on f4 with a very strong key pattern square. Rook g8. Black slowly intend to play actually g6, h6 and g5, but that will just created another weakness on the key pattern square f6. So basically white going to rook h3, and after bishop a5 he make maneuver with the rook h3, rook e3. Now he threats e6 to trap the bishop. Bishop must block the pawn, and now he played b3. What is the idea of move b3? We can see in a couple moves later. This is the genius idea. Maybe it's too much to say genius idea, but it's a great key pattern idea. Bishop d8, g3. He established still the knight on f4 and defend the pawn h4, g6, and now he going to king b1, b6, bishop b2. Now c5 is not possible because always hanging the pawn on d5, and white prepare something what look like c4. After move c4, black is in serious trouble because he must take. He don't have better move. And now white play rook d6. So we have here key pattern square c4 with the pawn, and key pattern squares d5. But after d takes c4, it's open other weak key pattern squares in a white favor. So why I put all these arrows and circles on these squares? Because this is important. When you created one kind of pressure and you use some key pattern squares, like in this case that was square c4 and d5 and knight on f4, and when black takes and white play rook d6, usually one kind of pressure with the key pattern squares open another key pattern squares, and that means actually the game is close to be win, because white just simply in this situation cannot defend all weakness what actually white rook created now. So with the arrows we seen all these problems, and now rook e7, rook c6, king b7, rook e6. Now white simply transpose to totally winning endgame. B takes c4 and white stay with the extra pawn. Now of course black play f4. I don't know why, but position is very difficult anyway. He play f4. He probably wants to do something with his bishop, but now white plays simply rook h3, and after bishop f2, rook h7, king c6, king c2, b5, king d3, bishop g3, rook f7, and after bishop f2, white simply transposed to the winning rook endgame without any chances for black. So after a4, black resigned because simply white threats in this situation rook f6 or f5. All this is winning, and simply black resigned. So in today's video we covered around 5 positions, but what we seen one very instructive line actually, which white can everybody who play e4 he can easily go to this kind of position after of course Ruy Lopez, and exploit all these key pattern squares which actually become and created in a middle game. I hope this lesson will help you to improve Ruy Lopez exchange, very old classical variation with all these key pattern squares which we can use when we play our games. Thank you guys, and see you in next video.